Welcome to Roots of Faith Ancestry. Today we're going to be taking a look at census records. And that's a great place for a beginner genealogist or even an advanced genealogist to start with and to look at and revisit. I know in my case even I'm oftentimes revisiting them. What is a census record? It's a record that was created by the federal government. It started in 1790 and every state is different and they take these censuses every 10 years. And it's a count of the population of the area. And when it started in the 1790s, it was also for taxation purposes. And now in modern times, they use it for congressional districts to know how many people are living in a geographic area. The thing about them, Louisiana, when we became a state, was actually like 1812, but our censuses began in 1810 up until the present. Now, we do them more recently, but there is a rule, and it came about in the 1970s, that you can't release information for privacy purposes for less than 72 years. And that being in mind, the 1940 census is the first one that we will look at and go backwards from there. Again, remember with genealogy that we're always working backwards from us, then our grandparents, and now we're getting into a time frame where they might not be alive, and we're going to glean as much information as we can out of these records that are available. And when I say genealogy information that's found in them, what happens is every 10 years, they will ask a different set of questions. Sometimes they overlap. Judy will go into more detail on that in a little bit. But they look at what's going on in the nation, and that's how they pinpoint what they put in. Like, I think it might be the 1940 one that says, do you have a radio? There might be some in the late 1800s that ask if you're a farmer or if you're in agriculture. So the subject matter changes, and they're a wealth of information when you can find your family in them. It's also important, some of the things may not be totally genealogical. For instance, on some of the later censuses in the left-hand margin, they might, especially in a city like New Orleans, they'll give an address. And you can find out exactly where they're living, and if they're living in the same place, that address will stay the same. So we have a lot of tremendous information that's found in these early censuses. Again, they are a tool. This is not necessarily fact. They had different people taking censuses, and the rules changed over time. In the old days, marshals would come in, and I mean, you come to South Louisiana and the names get butchered. And then over time, you had local census takers, and they could appoint somebody in a neighborhood to go and get the census. Thing is, if people didn't read or write, and the neighbor was home and nobody was home at the household next door, he could ask the neighbor for the information about the family that wasn't home. And so what happens is, there may be some discrepancies in that census, but it's a great tool. And it's one in which we're going to look at closely, and Judy will tell you what the different areas are that give a lot of information about your ancestors. So I will let Judy do some explaining, and we'll look at some of the different years as we go back.
Okay, thank you, Renee. I started with the 1940 census because that's the first census that we have available to us. And I picked a neighborhood where I live, and we didn't live there at the time, but I wanted to use this as an example and to show a couple of things that were unique to the 1940 census. Of course, you have the names of the head of household. You have everyone who lived in that household and their relationship to the head of household. You also have their ages, where they were born. And one of the unique things about the 1940 census is that it says where the family was living 5 years earlier in 1935. So if you have them, if they're on the move, this can help you pinpoint where they were 5 years earlier. And another piece of information that's unique to the 1940 census is that they indicate who was the person who gave the information to the census taker. So that would help you weigh how accurate that information might have been. Now I moved back. I'm not going to go through every census, but I wanted to highlight some of the genealogical pieces of information that are available on some of the census. And I'm pulled up the 1910 census. And one of the unique things about this one is that it tells you how many years the husband and wife have been married. So that can help you in locating a marriage record. Also, this one tells you how many children the wife has had and how many are still living. So that can help you find any children who might have died before that. Of course, you have all the same information about where they were born. You've got the births of their father, the place of birth of their father and their mother, and occupation, and so on. Now I pulled up the 1900 census to look at. This one is from Ascension Parish. The 1900, the 1910, the 1920, and the 1930 censuses will give you information on immigration, the year that they immigrated to the United States and their naturalization status. And I pulled a couple of examples here to show you. One person had immigrated to the United States in 1856 from England and was still an alien, and someone else just below him was from Ireland who came in 1867, and he was naturalized. Those are shown by AL for alien and NA for naturalized. There's another code, PA, which means the papers had filed. That was somewhere in between being an alien and being naturalized. They filed their papers, but they weren't quite yet naturalized. That can provide you some clues as to where to look for immigration, more information on immigration and naturalization. Now, as we get back into the 19th century, the information that we have on the census becomes less and less detailed. I've skipped over to 1850 to show you here. This is from Iberville Parish to show you that we still have the names of the people in the household. We have their ages, male or female, their occupations, a little bit about their real estate value, where they're from. But what we don't have in this census that we had in later censuses is the relationship of each person in the head of household. And that's something that beginners sometimes get tripped up on, thinking that everyone in the household is related, or all the children in the household, or that couple's children, and they may not be. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at these censuses. Now, as I said, this is the last census where we're going to have all the names of the people in the household. If you skip down to the 1840 census, which I show here from West Feliciana Parish, we just have the names of the head of household, unfortunately. And that's been a problem for genealogists since the beginning. All we have is statistics on who the other people in the household are. We have little hash marks or numbers to show how many people, how many males under the age of 5, how many females under the age of 5, and so on. So we don't have the detailed information of the names of each of the head of household. And it's like this all the way back to 1810 for Louisiana and 1790 for the eastern colonies, unfortunately. So that's just something we have to live with.
And as Judy is giving this information and she's saying these different questions on it, if you've never looked at a census record before, you'll be able to go to, we can put this on the website so you can pull them, because when you see them up on the screen, you may not be able to read what's written at the very top. What Judy's talking about are tiny little questions written across the very top of the page. And plenty of people just never really know what that is to know what's written below it. And that's where you find all this great information. And it changes from census to census. So if you can get a blank one, and if you have to, if you're my age and you have readers and you need to blow up those little questions on the 1870 or on the 1920. And you have to turn the page sideways because they're written upward. But all of this information she's talking about that we're gleaming off of there, it's written on the very top, and you can blow it up and actually see it. And it's good to revisit these census records because you can pull it and make a copy, but every time you look at it, you might glean more information. There's one that asks if there's anyone in the household that's deaf or dumb. And that might sound crazy, but I actually picked up on that many years later, that one of the children, had a problem, and who knows what they meant by that at that given point or time. So it's a tool, and there's a wealth of information in it. I know we're covering this very briefly, but this is a chance for you to explore them and learn about them and really get your feet wet looking at the information. And when we come back from a break, we're going to talk a little bit more and do a case study, and we'll end on this note. Thank you.
Here at St. Joseph Cathedral, we are famous for our organ music. We have 3 pipe organs here at the cathedral. The large one, which you see used on Sunday when you watch the TV Mass, but we also have 2 smaller ones. This one here is easier to show you, for example. I wish I could play, I don't. But I do know a few things about pipe organs. They're complicated. How to get music out of all of these pipes. Now, of course, they do easily make music, but that is a far cry from making the various pipes play in harmony with various chords. But it enhances the prayer and worship and aids the singing so much. Let's face it, who doesn't admit that music adds to their prayer? The organist who does play the organ here at the cathedral, Mr. Rabbi Giroir, is most accomplished, not just playing the organ, but he's also mastered a talent that I think I have. He gets to ring the bell at the consecration of the Mass. Pretty complicated, don't you think? In any case, visit the cathedral. Come to us. Pray with us. Try to be an active member of the Diocese of Baton Rouge by discovering its mother church.
Hello everyone, I'm Shannon Acord and this is Colette Keith, and we're talking about Veritas Vitae, a brand new show that's going to talk about the sacredness of God's gift of life from conception to natural death and every stage in between.
We'll be discussing human trafficking to abortion to hunger. So tune in every week to see these episodes and learn how we're all connected by these issues and learn about the power of God's truth.
If you're discerning a call to the priesthood, contact the Office of Vocations.
Welcome back. In just a moment, Leonard is going to do a case study and actually take us through the census records. But before we do that, I realized, Judy and I both on break were talking, and realized that we do the census every 10 years, but the 1890 census across the whole nation actually was lost to a fire or water damage following the fire. The point is that we're missing that set of records. Here in the state of Louisiana, we do know that Ascension Parish had part of the census information, so you can at least know if you're from that area and you're looking in Ascension Parish, you may have some records for your family. But overall, nationwide, the 1890 census is non-existent for genealogical purposes. And the biggest glitch that puts really is young girls marrying and leaving the house is one of the things. So I'm going to turn it over to Leonard, and he's going to present us with a case study so you can kind of see the progression of following your ancestors back.
Okay, I want to start with the 1940 census. As we mentioned before, is that you work your way backwards when you're actually doing your research. And so I'm going to cover my great-grandfather who lived in Rouge Parish that I know passed away in 1950. So I do know that I should find him on the 1940 census. So going to the internet, I actually pulled through Ancestry.com, where I actually have I have to have the service, and I actually found him. And the reason why I do have him, and his name is Andrew Brown, is that I did find from oral history from my father, talking to him, what was his grandfather's name. And so that's how I ended up with Andrew Brown. And so I had to document and then go back into time and see if I can find him in the census. So the first census that I find him in is 1940, and he's living on Highway 29, which is great because in the 1940 census, on the left-hand side, they actually will give you their location of where they live. It also shows me that he's a homeowner. So that's another record that I can look up, which would be a land record. He's also a head of the household, and he's the only person in this household. I do know that my great-grandmother had already passed by then. It also mentions that he's male, Negro, age 71. It also mentions that, as Judy mentioned before, previous 3 or 5 years ago, he's in the same house. And I do have the research I've done to actually find out where this property came from. But again, that's another record that's most important for you to find. But it also, as I scan over, it actually talks about occupation. Now, his is not listed, but I'm assuming at 71, he's probably not working anymore. But I know he was a farmer, and he also did moss picking, which is actually indicated on another census. So going back to 1930, I actually located him again, same vicinity, Lafourche, Ward 1, District 29-1, District number 10. And I also always make note of when the census was taken, because it's April the 3rd of 1930. In some cases, if he had passed away, say in December of that same year, at least I do have up to that time where he's actually living, and it's April the 3rd. So I do see that Andrew Brown still in the household by himself. He's the head of household. His real estate owning, he owns the property. It's worth $300. He's Negro, age 61. The previous census, 1940, actually stated that he was 71, so we're kind of consistent with that. But now they actually say that he's single, which I knew he had been married before, but my grandmother and him had divorced early on in the 30s, and so it may have been even before 1930, since this is the 1930 census, and now he's indicating that he's single. His occupation is a moss picker, which in Louisiana, we all know about that. And so I do know in research that I did find that there was actually a gin nearby where they may have actually, he may have actually brought the moss, and some of the oral history that I actually got from another ancestor, another relative who lived to be 103, but I got a chance to interview her at age 101, told me about he picking moss, and he would actually hang the moss on the fence. So that's how you tie the stories in together. You get the oral history, and then now you look for documents that support the story. So we move back to 1920. Here's Andrew Brown again, and now I notice that the location is called Bayou Road now, which is actually on Lafourche Bayou Lafourche, so he's right there, and this is in the St. John community. He's actually head of household. He's owner. He's male. He's black. He's age 51. It also has him still as a moss picker. Okay, so this is being kind of consistent. I'm seeing Ward 1. I'm seeing a lot of the similarities to the previous, which is a 10-year span. So that's a good thing. That means that these are good documents that I could probably work with. 1910 census is the one that comes up next, and what's different here is that he's living with his father. Now, his father, I actually traced back to the Civil War. His father actually died in 1917 because I actually have his military records, his pension records. But what's interesting about this is that Andrew now is listed as the son. He's not the head of the household. He's age 41. He's divorced. So again, now I know that he's probably divorced even earlier than I thought. He's actually born in Louisiana. His mother and father from Louisiana. But the interesting thing about his father information is that his mother and father were both born in Maryland. So that gives me another clue to go to another location to find maybe this Charles Brown, which is his father, on the census record. I actually did find Charles Brown Civil War records, and he was always in Louisiana, and I also was able to find his father's records just because I was actually backtrack into a lot of these records. Now, for some strange reason, I could not find Andrew Brown in 1900. And so, again, he may have relocated to another city, maybe New Orleans, because that's where the family ended up at. And he may have actually moved back. That was the story I was told, that he actually moved back to New Orleans, back to Lafourche, Thibodeau. But I did find him on the 1880 census. And what was interesting about that, this is where I actually found his grandfather, who actually, with his grandmother and along with his father. Now his father's wife is now not here, so he's listed as a child. He's 12 years old. He's the grandson, so he's living with his grandparents. They don't have a location, but it's still the First Ward, Lafourche, St. John community. 1870 was an interesting one because, let me also mention, though, that because of not having the 1890 census, that's a big gap. That's 20 years. And so sometime what you have to do, in the case of my Charles Brown, by him being a Civil War veteran, I was able to find, there was an 1890 special census for military. So I was able to find information about him and where he was living at. So that actually supports the story that they were still in the same community. In 1870, which is when they actually purchased that property that I spoke of, that I actually found the land records for, they actually are on 2 pages of the census. He's on the bottom is his mother and father, but because they ran out at the end, he's actually his brother and Andrew are actually on the 2nd page. So you got to make note of that. Sometime it may continue to the next page. What's interesting about that is that he has a brother listed here who's only 1 year old, Jefferson, who I actually have found didn't know until I got the Civil War records that he was deceased and that he actually died as a child, maybe age 2 or 3. So that is how you backtrack into your family. Andrew was born in 1868, and so he's 2 years old in 1870 census, and he lived well to be aged, I think he was 78, whatever that was. But he died in 1950, and I was able to backtrack his whole timeline there.
Cool. Now, the 1870 for African Americans, you hit a dead end.
Yes.
Because the 1860, we had slavery. Not for all African Americans, but those that are slaves.
That's right.
And when we're working with researchers that do come in, that's sometimes the brick wall.
Yes.
And it's amazing. Anytime we get anybody that can get to the 1870 and there's a dead end and nobody's finding them, we have to start looking at, okay, why? And this is a possibility. But it's the last one for those that come from slavery.
Well, it was amazing, too, when I actually found the Civil War record. When he actually enlisted in the Civil War, it mentioned that he was actually a free person of color.
Cool.
So, but I did not find him in the 1860 census as actually being free. Yeah. So again, that's another part, as you say, that you actually have to get more into detail. And there's other documents out there. I just have not found them, but I know they're there.
You'll find them. You'll find them. It never stops, folks. It never stops. We are always looking, no matter what. That was great. Thank you. If you're in East Baton Rouge Parish, they have what's called Heritage Quest. If you have an East Baton Rouge Parish library card, the number on your library card, if you go to the website, they ask for your ID number. You can type in that number that's on your card, and you get their online database. And if you look for Heritage Quest and click on it, you can look at, there's all different kinds of records, but one of those is the census records, and that's a free search.
One thing I'd like to add is that if you live in a parish neighboring East Baton Rouge Parish, you can get a reciprocal library card from East Baton Rouge Parish and access the databases that East Baton Rouge Parish subscribes to.
I wondered that. I'm not kidding. I've wondered that before. So that's really good information. There's some other Family Search.
FamilySearch.org, the Mormons website, also has the censuses online, and that's a free website, so you can search that for free.
That's right.
Good. Ancestry, of course, and some of the others are paid subscriptions, but you can do 2-week trial memberships. And so if you have free time, you're on vacation, or you've got a stretch where you really want to go and do a lot of research in it one time. I know people that will do the trial just to see, can I do it? Are they there? You know, and it's a good chance to have those in your house.
And the East Baton Rouge Parish Library also subscribes to Ancestry library version.
Oh, that's right.
But you have to go into the library to access it. You can't do it from home, whereas you can do Heritage Quest from home. You can't access Ancestry from home.
Are the librarians there, do you know, are they helpful with helping beginners work
very
with it?
helpful.
And that could be a great resource for those beginning that are intimidated by census records, since it is a good starting point. That would be a great thing for them. You know, visit your library, have your librarian help you get started. And that way, once they help you with the ropes of the actual hands-on, then you might branch out onto the internet, something like that, along that route. So that's another tip for census records. And there are so many nuances. You had a great case. The names, you know, the names matches, the ages match. We could go on forever with the nuances and things that occur. In my case, I have one that I know it's the right family, and they list a Joseph in a certain age, and she's Josephine. You know, so we have to watch for that. And as a whole,
ages are
big. Women get younger as they get older, and men get older and women get younger as the censuses progress. So you take it with a grain of salt. You also brought up, we're running out of time, and I'm going to be quick, but you brought up that date that they took the census. Very important, because birthdays happen before or after that date. So, you know, with that in mind, I mean, we could keep on going. We got a little bit more time. Anything else to add on census right off the bat that you can think of that's important?
Well, you know, when you run into common names, like in my case, Smith, and this was a Brown, there's always other Browns, there's always other Smiths. So it's always great to reference back to their location. And if you have the census that actually have where they live, that's always a good starting point for you.
Awesome. We could just keep on going. We are out of time, folks, so we're going to take it down to the wire. But join us again next week. We're going to be looking at a different set of records, vital records, civil vital records, and then we'll look at church records in the episode after that. So join us next week for Roots of Faith Ancestry.